I am Reverend Sandana Gallman Ashley, and I have the privilege of serving as a transitional Synod leader for the Synod of the Northeast.
My name is Cindy Coleman. I serve as connectional presbyter and stated clerk for Newcastle Presbytery, which is Delaware and the Eastern Shore of Maryland.
I'm Darius Bultina, and I serve the Presbytery of Tropical Florida, which is Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach.
My name is Kathy Nice. I'm the executive presbyter of the Presbytery of Scioto Valley. We're located in Ohio, including the Metro of Columbus and the whole way down into the Appalachian South.
My name is Corey Schlosser Hall. Right now I serve as a Deputy Executive Director for the Interim Unified Agency of the PCUSA, which is the unified body of the former Office of General Assembly and Presbyterian Mission Agency. Prior to that, I served for 15 years as an Executive Presbyter.
Barry Chance, I'm the General Presbyter and Stated Clerk of Eastminster Presbytery.
My name is Wendy Tajima, and I'm the Executive Presbyter of the Presbytery of San Gabriel in Southern California.
Dee Cooper, I'm the lead presbyter at Denver Presbytery.
So my name is Steve Houston, and I am the organizing co-leader for the Presbytery of Northeast New Jersey.
Hello, I am Sally Watson, and my title is Associate Director of Mid-Council Relations for a term period. And that means that I'll be here until next March, and I'm working for the Interim Unified Agency of the Presbyterian Church USA.
With your experience in mid-council work, what do you imagine that the Presbytery will become in the future?
I still see the Presbytery as being that main connection between pastors and congregations. And so in the future, I really don't see that role changing. I think being a part of what nurtures congregations, resources, leaders, that role won't change. But one of the things that I think all presbyteries are considering how they do mission. And how do you do leadership development? And what leads toward thriving and sustainability? So a part of the task, I think, for a presbytery is to model what that might look like for congregations that are grappling with the exact same things, but just on a more local level.
I think some things will continue to be the heart, because at heart, the presbytery exists to support congregations and be the home for minister members. Yeah. I mean, that at heart is our purpose. There are book of order requirements wrapped around that, and so as those change, if those change, it impacts the role of presbytery. Yeah. But you can't be a presbytery unless you have a certain number of churches and a certain number of teaching elders. And I think that is an important thing to keep in front of us, because it speaks directly to our why. Why do we exist? We exist for the good news, specifically as it's shared in a congregational setting and as it is shared by teaching elders. We add, of course, commission ruling elders, commission lay pastors, whatever language you prefer. And so that's a piece of our pastoral leader equation. But that's where we have to start. We have to start with, how do we support the gospel through our congregations and our pastoral leaders? But at heart, I believe the presbytery, through the future, into the future, will be responsible for doing all it can to support the congregations and those who lead them to be faithful to their time and place.
Well, I think that it's really a cool question, because our Constitution actually really describes the work of the presbytery right there in G30101, I believe it is, where it talks about the work of the presbytery is to nurture, guide, and govern. And I would say that so often presbyteries, at least in recent decades, have leaned fully into the governing piece. Yeah. And I think that we're called more to reach into that nurture and guiding piece, to help our churches, our congregations, figure out how do we not only nurture people in the faith, but how do we nurture our communities to vitality? How do we nurture our congregations in such a way that they can have this vibrant life? And that guiding role really becomes about lifting up some of the creative new models. I think the old ways of being the church, while are wonderful and beautiful, they may not function in sort of this new world, in sort of the new age that we're stepping into. And that's why things like changing churches, really the whole idea of a church on this corner and one on a corner not far away, what if we really kind of shifted those boundaries and said, what's it mean for you all to be together? What's it mean for you to do something new? How about when we say that to presbyteries, maybe even to synods? What's it mean for you to be together, to do something new? We tend to hang on to our old of how things have always been, how things are going to be. Well, if God's always about doing a new thing, if this life of faith is about transformation, why do we want to hang on to that old stuff too? What if we experiment? What if we try? What if we step out? What if we allow that creative energy and spirit that is God to kind of step into our midst and shift things around? Shift our boundaries, shift our size, create a larger critical mass that we might actually do some exciting new things rather than always talking about what we don't have. Start to imagine what we might have and who we might be.
Actually, I'm starting to see a lot of it now. I'm recognizing that as our churches get smaller, they have fewer people resources, not only financial struggles. And so that means they become a lot more dependent on the staff of the presbytery to be able to provide creativity, to provide things like, how do we find somebody whose insurance is cheaper? What do we do about a leaking roof? And so we are finding that we need to restructure ourselves so that we can become the resource providers. We are less being the people who do the keeping track of things for General Assembly and more about how can we provide the help that our churches need so that they can focus on their real mission, which is serving the Lord. So I think presbyteries might be getting a lot more merged together to save on administrative overhead costs. But at the same time, we're going to see a lot more specific roles for people in service in the mid-council. People who can help with things like property concerns, things like insurance concerns, even having bookkeeper time that can be allocated to our small churches so that they become actually a part of the services that we can provide, not a control thing, but a benefit.
I hope what it becomes is something more like a forest. And out here, I live in the greater Seattle area. Out here in the Pacific Northwest, we have these robust, abundant forests that are full of greenery and wildlife, both at the upper story and the middle story and the ground story. And so my wife and I, we love to take our dog hiking every weekend, and we learned this word, a Japanese word called shinrin-yoku, which means forest bathing. So instead of going hiking, we go forest bathing. And one of the reasons why I share that image is because whenever I'm in the forest, the thing I'm most struck by is, especially this time of year, is how many new shades of green are emerging. So there's light green, there's this deep, dark green, and then there is really clear evidence of last year's growth. So you see these really robust, beautiful ferns with some strong fronds. You see other ferns they're almost as soft as feathers, and they're just unfurling. And then if you look down at the base of the fern, you will see all kinds of leaves from last year. You'll see branches and sticks and other things that have come down in previous years. And it's providing nutrients for this new, both the new delicate growth and the more sturdy fern frond. So I'm just using ferns as an example. You can see every stage of living and dying in the forest in a screen view. And my hope is that presbyteries become a place where robust new spring life is nurtured and held and sought to be brought into being, I think in an even more robust and more abundant way than we usually see. But that requires that kind of fullness of an ecosystem of the wisdom of the past, the blessings of the past, even the nutrients and assets of the past, if you will, that helps make it possible for a delicate new fern frond to be held and to be encouraged and to allow it to unfurl. And so my hope and vision for the life of a presbytery is it is a place of abundant new life, and it is a place of blessed and giftedness of existing life, and it's a place where the life of the past is fueling the new fern fronds of the future. So that's kind of how I like to think of that in a more ecological way than in an organizational way. So that we recognize what we're doing is really stewarding and hoping for and giving nutrients to and pulling forth, giving vision to what is growing, developing, what God is trying to do now. And that is blessing what God has done and will continue to do. And I see it as an abundant place. You know, the carbon dioxide is the thing that a forest needs in order to make this kind of thing work. And for us, I think that carbon dioxide is the Holy Spirit. And I hope that we grow much more attuned to that third person of the Trinity, to the Holy Spirit, because she moves in so many unique and mysterious ways, and she is able to draw up spiritual leadership that we don't expect. She's able to draw connections between people that we could never orchestrate on our own. And all of these things create the possibility of these new developments to grow and find new ways of embodying the gospel of Jesus Christ in the world. So the presbytery has a unique field of view and stewardship for a past, present, and a future story among and between bodies of Christ that give it a unique role in the whole ecclesial ecosystem that I think makes this possible.
I think in many ways the presbytery in the future will be what it is now. It's a connecting body that supports the work of pastors and congregations in carrying out the work of Christ in the world. The problem is the future will look different. And we're going to have to learn, and we're already learning new ways of doing that. The way in which congregations have experienced this sea change all around them, of secularization, of the decline of social organizations across the board, not just churches, but Boy Scout troops and elk lodges and all of these things, and the realignment of society around individualism, and the ways in which the church is struggling to speak into that moment. The job is the same, sort of, in that our job is to support pastors and congregations to share the gospel. But when the tide has gone out and we're not sure if we can follow it or if we should follow it, That's going to be our job. It is our job right now. And in some ways it was our job 50 years ago, the time we look back on as the high water mark. But how we do that looks really different.
I actually think the Presbytery is critical for the future of our church as a connectional church. I've come to see how different the regions are and how the communities are. So presbyteries are really important since they're able to contextualize and understand better the needs of the local church and the needs of their community or their region. But they also are able to bring those different perspectives that any one congregation doesn't necessarily have. So it's a good mix of what's happening with that area and the ministry needs of that area, but also having different perspectives and a little bit more that they can learn from each other and do some resource sharing, which is always going to be important to us.
Yeah.
In terms of a vision for the Presbytery, I actually do hope for, and I've actually been able to see this in my presbytery, that we are able to talk about some things, allow for flexibility and options, and just a little bit of challenge as well as support. So there's support in difficult times, but there's also new ideas that folks can take back to their congregations. And I hear that a lot from the elders who come to presbytery meetings or participate in presbytery activities, that they're able to go back to their churches and say, hey, such and such church is doing this, have we thought about that? Or, you know, they were actually able to implement this thing. And so there's a lot of richness in being able to share the visions and dreams.
Great.
I really see a very exciting and inviting role of the presbytery. I think many times when we start to see changes in our organizational structure or big changes happening either on the national level or even on the congregational or communities of faith level, we translate that to everything is falling apart. And the reality is it's changing. And I really believe, and as we're watching changes happening on a national level, the impact is it's being seeded back into the presbytery of we are the container holders. We are the ones that hold the more localized, geographic-wise piece that's probably more programmatic, that addresses the needs of those in the community, but also helps them see how they support and continue to nurture and build each other. I think that's many times the role of the lead presbyter or the executive or whatever you're called is to help congregations see how do you actually share some of the same concerns and some of the same fears, some of the same joys and celebrations, and some of the same pieces that you're uncertain about, that we don't have an answer for. And how do we walk through that together? That to me is God's call that's calling to us at this time, and I think that's exciting. Many times I think what's happened is in the breadth and explosion and success of the Presbyterian Church USA is we became very self-sufficient with each of our congregations, and in the self-sufficiency we identified how we were unique, but we really kind of had this attitude of we don't need each other. We also had an attitude of projecting onto the other, well, they're a big church, they have all the answers, they don't need us, a smaller church here, when indeed they may be exactly what they need to bridge and talking about some issues, some topics, some challenges facing them. And so it's I see the presbytery as a gatherer, as a connector, as a bridge builder, and I do believe we are called to be sharing the gospel in many ways that our world is asking us to do these days. I find in presbytery work, many times we have the capacity to speak into what is gospel, into our world, where some that are serving their churches don't. So in that way, again, it's the container of we can speak to the whole of the values, of the mission, that some may be wrestling with in their own congregations, that they don't have that liberty or that freedom. We can be the inviter of considering ideas that are different from ours, and how do we grow into that?
So, with the work that I've done in mid councils, which has only been for the last 4 years, in helping to create this new presbytery in Northeast New Jersey, one of the things that I've come to believe about presbyteries and about the presbytery of the future, that it's going to look a lot less institutional, and it's going to look a lot more like a community of practice, a space where people can come together to learn, to grow, and also to support one another in ministry. So that phrase, community of practice, is really kind of what is at the heart of what I see happening with the future of the presbytery, because it's not just going to be a place where we take care of business or check the boxes that are required of us in the Book of Order. It's really where we come alongside one another, share what we're learning. It's a place where we can ask big questions and hard questions. And it's also a place where we can come and experiment and try new things together. So it's a place where pastors and ruling elders and congregational leaders know that they are not alone. Now, what's interesting is the community of practice model that is out there right now is one that is a corporate model, but it draws so heavily from what I see as the early church when I read a description, where people are coming together who are doing the same kind of work, where they can bring a case study and say, here's what I am dealing with in my situation. Have you dealt with something similar in yours? How did you handle it? Perhaps to get together, we can also be a learning community, and let's read a book together and decide, how this might apply to our particular context. It's a place where you can also just support one another with any, the challenges of being in ministry and in leadership in a congregation, or in other settings as well, whether that's chaplaincy or institutional ministry in seminaries and colleges. But that idea of a community that comes together around the practice of ministry and leadership. So that's kind of in a nutshell where I see the presbytery in the future. But it's about more than just that, because it's also a place that allows and kind of gives permission for experimentation, an opportunity to be bold, to fail, and then try again, but to learn from our failures and then try again. Kind of the idea I've heard, people talk about failing forward, and to know that the presbytery is the safety net and it's not a gatekeeper, because we're not about protecting old systems, but about creating flexible, spirit-led networks that help ministry to thrive wherever people find themselves doing ministry. And in order to do that, I think the Presbytery of the future needs to rethink power, and that the future is going to be more collaborative and less hierarchical. It's going to listen deeply to voices that we haven't always heard, especially those on the margins. And it's going to value curiosity over certainty and value relationships over rigidity. And most of all, I see the presbytery becoming a place ultimately of spiritual growth, not just for congregations, but for the leaders themselves. Because if we're not growing together spiritually, and if we're not deepening our capacity to be able to love and to listen and to lead with integrity, then there's no structure that's going to be able to carry us into the future. So when I think about what the presbytery could become, I'm actually very hopeful because I see a community where people are connected and they're supported and they are inspired to live out their call, not alone, but together. And honestly, that sounds good to me. So that's that's my kind of vision of what mid councils are heading towards. And some of them are there in varying degrees, but I think that as we move forward, we'll be more focused on how we exist as communities of practice.
I have been thinking about this question since you posed it to me, and um, the Interim Unified Agency, which is the terrible name for the group that I work with, the current merger going on at in Louisville. I understand that a big priority for them is going to be mid-councils. They are going to be focusing a lot of their budget and a lot of their thinking and a lot of their strategy on working with and supporting mid-councils, which has been a long time coming. I think they should have done that a long time ago. In the same way, I think that mid-councils, synods, and presbyteries need to be focusing on their congregations. And mergers like you all are considering are much harder to do west of the Mississippi because of the land mass. And y'all are also thicker with Presbyterians than we are, in this part of the world. But I don't think it would take a merger, though, to support congregations, and as you all talk about your merger happening, I hope that you will do it with an eye toward how is this going to help our congregations as much as or more than how is this going to save us money.